Hello and welcome back to Code Harvest. In this video, we are going to be creating an e-commerce website that sells electronics such as phones, tablets, headphones, laptops, and so on. We're going to be using HTML and CSS and mostly, but we're also going to be using a little bit of JavaScript. And this video will be detailed explaining why or how elements work, how the document works, and also why we're including the code that we're going to be including in this video. So now, without further ado, let's get started. Alright, since we are going to be creating a new e-commerce website, we're going to be starting from scratch completely. So when we check our HTML page, we have created an index HTML page, a CSS page, and we have our images and the products that we're going to be displaying. Alright, so from here you can see that we have already defined our document type, which is HTML, and inside our HTML tag we specified the language that we want to include, which is English, and also we included in our head tag the style sheet, and we can only do that by including the link tag. So when we check our style sheet, we can see that there is nothing in here as well. So we're going to start by typing in the website in which we can get our Google fonts from, which is fonts.google.com, and here we're going to be using Poppins since it is just more aesthetically pleasing and quite modern. So we're going to get the font, and by clicking on this button here we can get all of the fonts automatically. But if you want to reduce the amount that you want, so for example you only want from font weight of 300 to 500, you can just uncheck. Okay, so now that we have all of our fonts checked, from italic to bold to normal, we can just copy code, and we want to import this in our CSS file. You can also choose to copy this code and paste it in the HTML file, but I prefer doing it in the CSS file. So we're just going to copy that, ignoring the style tag, and now we have our font imported. Alright, so now we are done importing the font family or the font type that we want to use, which is Poppins. So now we're going to create a new line, and what we want to do is select all elements. So any element that is going to be inside the body. So actually let me create the tag body. So anything that is, and this is where we'll be including the navigation bar, all of our contents, images, the lists, buttons, etc. So what we want to do is select all elements, and we're going to use that by using the an asterisk. So this asterisk basically means select all elements. So what we want to do is we want each element to have a font family of Poppins. So in order to get the name right, we can just search in our link over here until we find the keyword family, family equals to, and then we can get the name of our font family, which is right here, Poppins. And in order to be safe, we can just get everything right up to the spelling, I mean not the spelling but the letter or the letter case that is being used. Alright, so however, a browser may not support Poppins, especially since we got this font family from an external source. So we can use an internal source or an internal font, which is called sans serif, and sans serif is pretty good. You can use any that you want. There's New Times Roman, etc., many more, but we're going to be using sans serif to make it simple. Alright, so now next what we want to do is we want to remove any spacing that is in an element by default. So for example, in an unordered list, there's usually spacing, unnecessary spacing, or in a navigation bar, there's usually like 5 to 10 pixels of spacing by default, which we do not add. So what we want to do is remove any spacing that there is in an element by default. So we're going to be using margin and padding. So what is margin? Margin is any spacing that is outside an element, and padding is any spacing that is within or inside an element. Okay, so just imagine like a box or a rectangle, a rectangular box, and it has text inside, like in the middle of the box. Now padding would give space between, the space between the text and the box, whereas margin would be the space outside the box, to make it more clear. Alright, so now we're going to be selecting the body, and inside the body we just want the background color to background or background color can both work, and we want it to be white or stay white. We just want to specify that. Alright, and now we're going to be creating our navigation bar. So we're just going to create a comment, since we're going to be adding or selecting a lot of elements in our CSS file. So we're going to add a comment to specify what section this is. So now we're going to be creating the navigation bar section. So we're going to start by including the HTML code. So what we want to do is we want to create a nav element, and then we can also create a new div, and we're going to be creating a new ID called navbar. So we could just style everything in the nav element. However, we just want to use the nav element as our container, whereas we can use the nav bar as our wrapper. So in our nav, we can just hold all of the elements that we're going to be including, so such as the links, and we want to specify the width of the navigation bar as well as the color that we want it to have. And we also want to specify what position it will have. So what we want to do is we want to make the navigation bar stick to the top. Even while we're scrolling down, it should stay on the top. So that's where we're going to specify or include that property in the nav element. Now in the div in the ID called navbar, we want to do is style our navigation bar. So basically, we want to include the format or the layout and the style that we want to use, such as we want to create a space between since we're going to be using a logo and we're also going to have links, we want to create a space between the logo and the links that we're going to be including. We want to include the padding, the amount of space that we want inside the navigation bar, and so on. And we also want to center, everything, the logo as well as the links, to the center of the nav element. So that's where navbar comes in play. So now inside, we are going to create our unordered list, and what I'm just going to be doing is create a list of elements, of our links, so home, products, services, and about, and I'm also going to be including the button that we're going to be using. Alright, so now just to briefly explain, UL stands for unordered list, and this is where we include our list items. So there's OL, ordered list, and unordered list, and inside we have included 4 list items. So LI stands for list items, and we've included a anchor tag, which is going to be like the thing that links us, or like if you click on one of the anchor tags, it will direct you to a different link or a different page of the website. And since we do not have the websites for products, services, and about, we have replaced that with the syntax hashtag, and we're going to replace that later on once we have continued to progress with the website. So we've also included a button, and we've included a class called blue button, since we're also going to be using a certain type of blue that is going to be used throughout the website. So we have made a class for it. Now we are yet to include 2 sections of the navigation bar, because the navigation bar will have a logo to the left and all of these links to the right. So now we need to include we need to separate the ID navbar into 2 sections. So the first one, we'll call it navbar links, and the second one will be called navbar logo. Alright, and in here we're going to create a new image tag, and its source will be, we're going to be using the logo, which is, actually this needs to be over here. So we're going to be using this logo called eLife. Alright, so as you can see, we have also included the width and the height that we want the logo to be. Obviously you can change the width and the height based on what logo or what image you're going to be using. So this is the image that we're going to be using, and now our image is set. So now obviously this is not the way we want it to look like. We want the logo to stay at the left, we want a little bit of padding, and we want the links to be moved to the right. So now we're going to be working on our CSS file. Okay, so now in order to style the nav elements first, we need to select it by including the name of the element, which is nav. So here we just want the background color to be white, to be transparent, because we're going to be using a blue background for the top section of the website. So we want it to be transparent to that color, or to have the same color. And we want the position of the nav element to be fixed. So this will allow the navigation bar to stay on top of the page even when scrolling down. Next, we also want our nav to cover the whole width of the screen. So we want to set the width to 100%. And another thing is we want the navigation bar to always be in front of each element. We do not want the navigation bar to be perhaps, for example, behind behind a box that is, while we're scrolling down, perhaps it appears behind the box, behind a box or product. We do not want that, and we want to avoid that by using Z index, which basically allows us to reorder and change the order of the way the elements are displayed, and we want the navigation bar to always be in front, so the first element. So we're going to set it to a high value because some elements may have a default may have a high Z index by default, so we want to make sure that the navigation bar is always in front of each and every element, so we want to set it to 1000. Alright, so next we're going to be working on our ID, which we called Navbar. So here we're just going to select the ID, and we use by using the hashtag syntax and then the name of the ID, which is Navbar. In order to select a class, where we use a dot, but since this is an ID, we use a hashtag. So in here, what we want is we don't want it to cover the full width of the navigation bar, which is also the full width of the screen. We want it to be slightly narrow, so we're going to set the width to 85%, and this is obviously an option. Now we do not see any changes yet, so now we're going to be using the flex layout called flex, which stands for flexible. So we want our layout to be flexible so that we can change the way the elements are ordered. And how we want to order it, we want to have the logo to the left and the elements to the right, the links to the right. So what we want to do is include this property called justify content, and we're going to be using space between. So now it is between, so now there is space between the logo and the links. However, you can see that it is not at the center, like the navigation bar is not at the center of the nav element, and that is because we have set the navigation bar, the ID, to 85%, so it is indeed 85%. However, we want to center it, we want to position it to the center. So in order to do that, we need to use margin. Alright, so what margin auto does is it basically calculates and puts an equal amount of spacing on the left and the right side of an element so that it can be centered horizontally inside its container or inside its parent div. So now using margin auto, you can see now that the logo and the links are now positioned horizontally to the center. Now if we wanted it to be vertically center, so from top to bottom, we can use place items. We can also use align items, which also serves the same purpose, but we're going to use place items, and you can see that the logo changed from the top to the center, to vertically center. Alright, and last but not least, since you can see that there is literally no spacing, we are going to be including spacing within the element or within the container, and we want it to be of 15 pixels. So what we want to do now is to change the flex direction that is being used, since now it is all in a column, but we want it to be in a row, so the links in one line and the button in one line. So first we're going to be working on the navbar links container, and we're going to, since it is an ID, we're going to be using the hashtag selector, and in here what we want to do is use the flex layout. So this is what it's going to do, is change the flex direction from a column to a row, but it only changes the two direct children of the navbar links. So the two direct children of the navbar links is the UL element and the button element. All of these list item and anchor tag are not direct children, they're like grandparents. So this is the parent, this is the child, this is the grandchild, this is the great grandchild, and so on. So the flex layout will only affect the direct children, which is the UL element and the button element. So we are yet to also include the same layout for the list items, but now we're going to be working on the direct children of the navbar links container. So now what we want to do is we want to specify the flex direction to be in a row, even though it is usually in a row by default, and we also want to make sure that all of our items are vertically placed to the center. Alright, and now what we want to do is work on our unordered list. So we want to remove the bullet points, which is the style that is added by default, and with the UL container we want to change all of these lists of flex direction to be in a row. So we're going to call in the unordered list, and in here we want to remove the bullet points, so we're going to include the property none, or set list style to none, and we also want all of our links to be in a row. Alright, so now that we have selected the unordered list that is inside the navbar links, and we have set its properties, we wanted to remove the bullet points and set the links to be in a row. We are also going to change the properties of the list item. So each of these list items we want it to have a spacing of 60 pixels. So there's margin left, margin right, margin top, and margin bottom, and all this basically, just as the name suggests. So margin left will be spacing, but only outside an element, but only towards the left side of that element. So now, as you can see, there is margin included, but only to the left side. So there's space between home and products and services, about and services, but not in the button. But we're going to be working on that later on. Alright, so now we are going to be selecting the anchor tag. So since the anchor tag is inside the navbar links container, we can just use the navbar links to select the anchor tag once again. We used the same thing for the UL and the LI elements. We can use it for the A element, the anchor element, and we're specifying that we want to style or change the styling of the anchor tag. So over here, what we want to do is remove the underline, and we can do this by using the property called text decoration, and we have to set this to none. We also want to create we want to change the color font to something more blackish, but I have actually found a better color combination. So we're going to be using RGB 64 64 64, and basically this is kind of like dark gray, but it's a little bit lighter than black, as we want to create a soft look. So we want it to look more modern and not too rough or rigid. Now another thing is we want to change the level of boldness that is being used, so we need to include this font weight property, and as you can see, we have also included the Poppins font weight, so it has a range from 100, as you can see, from here 200, 300, 400 up until 900. So we want it somewhere in between, and we want it to be a little less, but not too small. Not too light, but slightly bolder. However, you can see I feel like it looks a little too bold, so we're going to be using this property called WebKit font smoothing. So what it does is it smoothens the font or the letters of it smoothens the lining of the letter. So we're going to be using this, we're going to be setting it to anti-aliased. So what anti-aliased basically means is it is used in computing, and it basically smoothens the lining or the lines of an item or an element or an object. In this case, it will smoothen the lines of each letter that is displayed or shown. So now it creates a more softer look. It doesn't look too bold. So now we're going to be changing the font size, and this can be up to you. I decided to choose a font size of 16 pixels. Alright, so now we want to style our class called blue button. So remember, we used the blue button class so we want to select it and use it to style our button shop now, and this is where we will be able to include the margin left 60 pixels. So first, let's style our blue button. So since this is a class, we're going to be using a dot to select the class, and then afterwards the class name, and here we want the button to have a color of blue. So I have found a good color combination. So yeah, it seems like a good color combination. However, we want the color of the text to be white. Now there is a border by default, so we want to set the border property to none. We don't want any border. We also want to change the font size to be the same as the font size used for the links, so now it looks a little bigger. We also want to change the font weight to be slightly thinner. It looks like it might be at 600, so we want to set it to 500, and we want to include the same property that will smoothen the font or soften the lining of each letter to give a soft look or a modern aesthetic look. And now we also need to include, well, we're going to be including the padding later on, but since we're going to be using or creating an effect, we're going to be using transition, which basically helps to create this small animation effect where the background color or the color of the text can change based on what we want it to change to. In this case, we want the blue button to change from the color it is currently to slightly lighter. So that's going to be our animation. So down below, we're going to, in order to create this effect or to make it work, we need to use the hover property. So this basically means when we hover our mouse, when we put our mouse to hover around the button, it will, carry out the animation or the effect that we want it to have. So when the mouse hovers the button, we want the background color to change. So not the text, just the background color, and we want it to be slightly lighter. So I've also found a good combination for that. Okay, so when we hover around the button, it becomes lighter, which creates a smooth, lovely effect. And basically 0.3 seconds means it will take 0.3 seconds to change the color from the blue, the current blue that it is, to slightly lighter. Because if we remove this, then the color change would be too rough, so we want it to be smooth, so we have used the transition property. And basically what ease in and out does is when we hover around the button, the color change should be smooth, and even when our mouse exits the button, there should be a smooth effect as well, so inside and outside. Alright, so now we're going to be changing the properties of the button of the navigation bar. So we wanted to have specific properties, such as we want to change the padding, we wanted to have a certain border radius. So in order to do that, we want to select the current container that it is in, which is Navbar links. And in order to select the ID, we have to use hashtag and then the ID's name, which is Navbar links. And here we're going to select the button specifically, and what we want the button to have is, first of all, a margin or a spacing between about and the button itself, and we want it to have the same amount of spacing that each list item has. Another thing is we want it to have a padding, so this will be padding inside or spacing inside, and at the moment it is 0, so we want it to have a padding vertically by 8 pixels and horizontally by 20 pixels. So we could have just set it to one thing, so for example 20 pixels, but that will create equal spacing horizontally and vertically, but we want to specify the amount of spacing height wise and width wise. So height wise it should be 8 pixels, so a little smaller, and width wise we want it to be a little more wider. And one more thing is we wanted to have a border radius, so this will basically create a round effect, a round corner effect. So we forgot the semicolon. Okay, so over here we can include the property border radius, and we can set it to 7 pixels, which will basically make the corners of the button more rounder, so it creates a lovely modern style. Alright, so now we are done with working on our navigation bar. So we're going to head over to our HTML page, and over here we're just going to create a little comment indicating that we are transitioning from the navigation bar to the top section of the website, which will have the text, the large title, and the watch, the picture that we're going to be adding. Alright, so first we are going to create the container, and we're going to call its ID home top container, so something simple. You can think of a better one as well. So next we will create the wrapper. Okay, so you might be asking, what's the difference between a container and a wrapper? So basically, a container is an element that is used to hold the elements together, whereas a wrapper is used to basically style the way the elements inside the container will be, positioned, will be structured. So just like our navigation bar, the nav element so this nav element right here is actually our container, the container of the navigation bar, whereas the ID which we used, Navbar, is the wrapper itself, where we defined, like what spacing we wanted the navigation bar to have, the elements inside the navigation bar to have, which is the logo and the links. So we used justified content space between. So we used the wrapper in order to style and order and structure the elements inside the container, whereas the container just holds everything together. Alright, so now after this wrapper, we're going to create our text. We're going to be actually creating two parts. So one part will be the text, one part will be the image. So we'll have two sections. So our first section will be the text, and so we'll just make the name simple and we'll call it home top text. And inside we'll create the heading. So H1 stands for heading 1, so the first heading, and it is the largest heading. It has the largest font size, whereas so it goes from H1 until H6, where H6 has the lowest font size. Okay, so we're just going to create a little, like a phrase or a title, and we'll call it track your steps, something to hopefully persuade users. Alright, so afterwards we're going to be creating a paragraph where we'll be including some lorem text, that will be like basically a little description of what the e-commerce website is selling. And then afterwards we're also going to be having or including a button which should say C collection, and we're going to be using the same blue class, the blue button class that we used for the navigation bar. We're going to be using for this button in the home top container. So C collection. So now we'll include the class blue button. Alright, so now inside of the P tag we're going to just include some lorem ipsum. We're just going to search for it, generate it. Alright, so now as you can see, all of our text is above, but no worries. But the reason why it's all up here is because we have positioned the navigation bar. We changed it to a fixed position, so it's always on top. But since we set it to a fixed position, it is actually kicked out of the document flow. So it's kind of like it's no longer part of the document, even though it is technically. But yeah, so since it's not following the order of the document, it is not really on top. So the other elements in the document should be below the navigation bar, but since it can't really see the navigation bar as part of the document, it just puts itself in the space that the navigation bar could have been. So it kind of just ignores the navigation bar. Alright, so now we are going to be creating or including the image. So we'll create another div. So this is the second section of the wrapper, of the home top wrapper, and we'll just create an ID, and it will be as simple as home top image. Now we'll create an image tag, so we will include the image by typing in source. So the source comes from images and top watch PNG, so it's this image right here. Now one more thing that we need to include in our image tag is the alternative for ALT stands for alternative, and it basically means like if the image is not being shown, either the browser doesn't support it, or either some error has occurred and the image, or it takes time because of slow internet for the image to appear, then we want a little text to indicate that or to show the user that a specific image is supposed to be displayed. So we want to let the user know what the image is or what it looks like, and we're just going to say a large blue smartwatch. And now we have to close that image tag. So yeah, we're done. Okay, so now we will be working on the CSS aspect of the top section of the website. Alright, so right here we're just going to create a little comment to indicate that basically to help us to navigate around the CSS file more easily, since we're going to be adding a lot more code, so it's going to get a little busy in the CSS file. So let's create a little comment to indicate that this is the top section that we're working on. Alright, so now we're going to start with our top element, which is the home top container. So since it is an ID, we're going to be using a hashtag in order to select it, and here we're just going to include a certain background. I've found a great color combination, so it's a very light blue, and so the blue is kind of subtle, but you can still kind of recognize it or notice it. We're going to also define a specific height, and as well as we're going to be adding a little bit of spacing of maybe around 20 pixels. And also, since everything is on top, we want to create some spacing between the navigation bar and the top section itself. Alright, so now as you can see, we have found a great color combination, very light blue. We've also included a height of 80% of the viewport height. So VH stands for viewport height, and it basically is the frame of, or the size of the frame of the screen that we're currently using. So for example, since I'm using a laptop, this is the viewport height, so from here until here. Now for the container, we wanted the container to be only 80% of that viewport height, so the height ends at somewhere here. So if we change that to, for example, 50, it would be only 50% of the viewport height. Alright, we've also included a little bit of spacing, but this is only for the left and right, since we have defined different spacing for the top and bottom. So 150 pixels was more than enough to create a good spacing between the navigation bar and the container. However, you know, the reason why we didn't use margin is if we use margin top, it would create this it would make the whole document, you know, have a spacing on top, but we do not want that. We only, since the container does not consider a navigation bar part of the document, it ignores it, and it creates the spacing outside of the document, but we do not want that. We want it to be within the document, so we used padding, and this was an appropriate amount of spacing for the bottom side. And we also used the flex layout, the flexible layout, so that we could center all of our elements to the center, or position everything to the center horizontally. Now we're going to be working on our home top wrapper. So since it is also an ID, we're going to be using a hashtag. Just select the ID, and what we want for the wrapper is we want it to have a smaller width. Actually, let's start with including the flex layout, the flexible layout. So here we just want to include the flex layout so that we could use justify content and justify or position every element that we're going to be including in the wrapper, not to the center, but to have space between. So it will create a space between the text and a space between the image. Now we also want to make sure that the flex direction is in one line, so in one row rather than a column. Even though it is there by default, once you include the flex layout, the flex direction is by default in a row, but we just want to specify it. And also we want to reduce the width to about 85%, just like our navigation bar. So instead of adding a lot of spacing, like, I don't know, 50 pixels of spacing, I feel like it's better to just reduce the width of the wrapper. Alright, so I was about to add margin auto, since that helped us in the navigation bar area. Since we've included inside the wrapper of the ID called Navbar, we have added width of 85%, and we use margin auto to position our elements to horizontally center. We do not need that in this case, since we have included the flex layout in our container, and we have already centered it horizontally. We've centered the wrapper horizontally with justified content center in the container in its parent div. Alright, so now we're going to be working on the text, and basically, since you know, the content, the wrapper is separated in two sections, we want the text to take up 50% and the image to take 50%, or the remaining width. So we'll just say we want the width to be 50%, as easy as that. And another thing is, well, actually, let's work on everything inside the home top text. So in order to select the H1, instead of creating another class or another div, we can just use the container name in which the element is in, which is home top text, and select it through that. So we can use the container name and select the element that is in the container that we want to design, which is heading 1, and what we want is to include a certain color. So again, just like we use the same color that we use for the navigation bar links, it's not really black but really dark gray. We also want the same color for our heading, and we also want a very large font size, so we'll choose 50 pixels, and we'll include, okay, so we'll go with 600. So now that looks much better. Alright, so now we're going to be working on our little paragraph. So that is the P tag. Now again, instead of creating a new class or ID, we can just select the container name, its container name, which is home top text. Select the element that we want, which is the paragraph text that we want to style. So we'll include a certain font size, much smaller than the heading. So we'll go with 18 pixels. We want a certain, and we want it to be like less bolder than the heading, so we'll go with 400. And we also want a spacing between the heading as well as the paragraphs, but we only want it from the top, so we'll go with margin top, and I think we'll go with 15 pixels, whereas the color that we can choose, I found a good light color combination that goes well and that complements well. Alright, and now we're going to be working on the button. We're going to select the button by once again selecting the container, the name of the container that it is in, and we will create a larger spacing between the paragraph and the button this time. So unlike the heading and the paragraph, it was just 15 pixels. Now we'll double that, and we want our own spacing. So again, it has taken the properties of the blue button class, but we just want to include our own spacing. So again, vertically we want a spacing of 17 pixels, so height wise, whereas width wise it should be much wider by 45 pixels. And last but not least, we want the corners to be much more round than what is used for our navigation bar, so we'll go with 30 pixels, whereas for the navigation bar I believe we only used 7 pixels. Also, I feel like the width should be wider. Yeah, that's slightly better. Okay, so now the last thing we need to work on is our image, since that is what's causing our container to not look aesthetically good just yet. So we'll just select the name of the container, or its parent, which is home top image, and all we want is to change the maximum width should be of 450 pixels, and in smaller screens it should be able to reduce, but the maximum width should be 450 pixels. Alright, so now when we check our container, we can see that the text is still on top, so the container or the wrapper's height is probably from here until here, but it needs to be vertically centered. So we can scroll up to our wrapper, and all we need to do is use place items center. We can also use align items center. That also works. Alright, so now I think that the font size, the font size has been defined, like the font size of the blue button class has been set to 16 pixels, but we want the button inside the home container to be slightly bigger, so we will define it and we will increase it to 17 pixels. So that should look, that looks better now. Okay, and now we are going to be moving on to creating our collection, which will be right below this top section. So let's first work on our HTML. Alright, so now we are going to be moving on to a new line, and we'll also create a comment so that we can be able to navigate easier. And this time our section will be called our collection. So it will be like our collection, like the types of products that are being sold. So I'll put types of products selling. Alright, and now over here we're going to create a new div, and we'll call our ID collection container, something very relevant to the name of the section we're creating. And we will start with creating our first heading of this section, which we will call our collection simply. Alright, and now we are going to be creating our wrapper, and our wrapper will include all of our items, so each and every item or type of product that we're selling, so whether it be iPad or phone or laptop. So we want the not only the image or the icon, but also the text. Okay, so over here we'll create a new line, and we will call it simply collection items wrapper. Okay, it seems like I spelled this wrong, so not collection. Okay, so over here now we will be creating each item, so we'll copy and paste, but we'll create our first one to be our example. And the first one, we'll first create a class, since we're going to be repeating it over and over again, and we will name this class collection item. Now inside we'll have our two divs, so it will be separated in two sections. So the first section will have the class, the icon class, where the SVG or the image will be stored in. We'll not be using an image, we'll be using an SVG, but if you'd like to use an image, go for it. So yeah, so we'll call this class collection icon. So we'll add our SVG later. First, let's create our span, and this will just have the text, and that's why we're using a span, because all we're adding is a little text, which is going to be the name of the icon, and we'll call this class collection item text. Actually, I think collection name would fit better. And for our first one, I think we'll go with headphones. Okay, so now we will be copying and pasting we'll be copying and pasting this item maybe 5 times. Alright, so now over here we will start with our first icon. So we'll get a headphone, and we can get it easily and for free in Bootstrap. So we'll just go with Bootstrap icons. Okay, this is not the website. Here it is. Alright, so right over here, when we scroll down in the Bootstrap page, we can just click on copy HTML and paste our SVG. And I think we will change the width to be 50 pixels. Okay, so we also changed the text to phone instead. We'll also change the remaining ones. So this one will be smartwatch. It can be in any order that you'd like. This one can be a tablet. And last but not least, this can be a PC. Okay, so now we need to get one for smartwatch. Okay, so now when we reload our page and we scroll down, we can see all of our items below. Obviously, it is not good in terms of the design, so we obviously need to work on the CSS file right now. And we will be starting with our container, which, oh, I misspelled this. So we have named our container collection container, and we'll also include or add a comment indicating that this section of the CSS file is for our collection section. Alright, so now we want to create a background color, or include a background color that is darker than the top section's background color, so darker blue. And we also want to include the flex layout, and since this is not the wrapper itself, where everything needs to be in one line or in one row, this is just going to be the container holding everything, including the title, the heading, the first heading. We just want the flex layout to be in we want the layout to be in a column. So the title should be on top and the wrapper should be on the bottom. And you know, since this is the container and not the wrapper, it will not affect the wrapper items, since the flex layout of the container will only affect its direct children, which is the first heading and the wrapper itself, but not anything that is inside any of these elements, any of its children. Okay, so now we have added all our items. We also added a little spacing within the element, within the container, but we also used place items. Now, usually we would use justify content, because place items is usually used to place items vertically center, but now we wanted it to be horizontally center, but then we used place items instead of justify content, because flex direction, if the flex direction is in a row, then place items will place the items of the elements that is inside the container to be vertically center. But if the flex direction is in a column, then place items will center everything horizontally. So justify content could not help, but place items is much more flexible and can position the elements inside the container to be horizontally centered. So now we're going to be working on our first heading, so we can just select our container and specify the element that we want to style, which is our first heading, and we'll just change the color, add font weight, font size, and a little bit of spacing between the top edge of the section and the title itself. Alright, so now we're going to be working on our wrapper. So we're going to be changing the layout of the wrapper, so we want it to be in one line, and we want each item to have space around. But also we need to change the width and the height of each and every SVG. We only changed the one for headphones, so we want the width and height to be 50 pixels for all of the icons. Okay, so here now we're going to be working on our wrapper. So let's scroll up, get the name, collection items wrapper, and since it is an ID, we're going to be using a hashtag to select it. So what we want to do is include a flex layout. So we want our wrapper to be flexible because we want all of our items to have space around. Okay, since we did not really define the width of the wrapper is only from here to here, so until the length of the whole array of the elements. But if we changed it to, for example, 100%, then there'll be some space displayed. But we do not want it to be 100%, we want it to be just 70%, should be good. And we want some padding space because it looks like it's very squashed between the two elements, the heading 1 and the div container, the div wrapper. So we will set the padding space to 50 pixels. So now that looks much better, but we'll obviously change the centering of each of these icons very soon. So now let's work on our item. So here we can just select collection item, and also if you're wondering, even though the width, we have changed the width of our, or we have specified the width of our wrapper, it should have been just pushed to the left side perhaps, but because in our container we have said we wanted everything to be placed to the center, the container has done that for us, place items has done that for us, so we do not need to add margin auto. Okay, so over here we will, since it's a class, we're going to select it by using a dot, and we want each and every item to be in a column. So this is just going to be, each item. So this is one item, item 2, item 3, item 4, item 5, and each of these items should have a flex direction of a column, which already is which is how it is already, but we also want the items to be centered. So we need to use the flex layout layout, and now we want the flex direction to be in a column, since when you put a flex layout by default, it's gonna the flex direction is gonna be in a row. So we're gonna change that to be in a column. Another thing is we want to place all of our items horizontally centered. Justified content will not work in this case since the flex direction is now in a column. Okay, and now we're going to be working on our second class of the wrapper, which is collection icon. So this is just working on our icon and what color we want it to have, etc. So first of all, we want to create a circle in which the icon will be within or inside. The text will not be included, just the icon. And we want to specify specific width and height, and we want it to be in a circle, so not just a boring square, but we want it to be in a circle. So we're going to be using border radius. We also want to have a little bit of a box shadow, so it kind of creates a 3D effect. And we also want to add some smooth transition, so when the mouse hovers around the circle, the background color of the circle should change. So now let's work on that. Alright, so now we've already created our white element holding our SVG. So here we have obviously kept the background color to white, specified a width and height that would correlate with the SVG. Considering the SVG was 50 pixels, we set it to double its width and height. And we also made the border radius to 50%. So anything that is 50% or above, when you set the border radius as 50% or above, it creates a complete circular effect. So for example, we use border radius in order to create a small round effect, and maybe like for example for the navigation bars button, we set it to 7 pixels. For the other one we set it to 30 pixels, but for this one, since we want to create a full circle, we want it to be 50% or above. Now we also used a new one which we haven't used yet, called box shadow. So this specifies the X value, this specifies or defines the Y value of the box shadow, and this specifies how blurry or how smooth the shadow will look like. So you can see the little shadow that makes it look pretty 3D, and that's what we wanted. So obviously these two can be negative or positive. So if this was positive, for example 50 pixels, if this was 50 pixels, then it would move more to the right side, but if it was negative 50 pixels, it would move more to the left side. So it works just like a mathematics graph. but we do not want it to be left or right. We just want it to be down, which is why we set the y value to 5, but we don't want the y value to be a high value. So for example, if we set it to maybe something more recognizable, we'll set it to negative 50 pixels, it would move up, but we wanted it to be down. Okay, and also we use the RGB value. So I'm sure you know RGB stands for red, green, blue, which we've used to define the colors that we have used throughout this document, so including our buttons. Now A is an addition, and it does not stand for addition though, it stands for alpha, and it basically specifies or defines the amount of opacity or the amount of transparency that the color will have. In this case, this will have 0.3. So for example, if I kept it to completely black, so if I kept it to 1, it would look very, very black, but we don't want that. We want it to be a little lighter, a little more transparent, so I could create a good shadow effect. So we set it to a lower value of 0.3. Now we've used, we've defined the color that we wanted for the icon, so we made it to match the color of the heading. And we have used a flex layout in order to center our SVG element item, which is inside the circle, to make sure it is vertically centered by using place items, and horizontally centered by using justify content. And justify content finally works here, unlike for this one, because the flex direction was in a column, but now the flex direction as by default is in a row, so we can use justify content to center the SVG horizontally. And we also want to create a transition effect where when we hover our mouse towards the icon or the circle, the background color should change, as well as the SVG's color. So over here, we're just going to copy this same class, and we'll include the function hover, and we just want the background color to change to like a certain type of blue, and we want to change the color to become white, so the color of the SVG should turn to white. So now that looks great. Alright, so now we're going to be working on our item name. So here we called it collection name, and it is a class, so we need to add some margin space on top. So we'll just use margin top for this, and we want there to be a 20 pixel difference in spacing. We also want to keep the same color that we used for the heading, which is 64, 64, 64, and we are going to change the level of boldness, and we want it to be 500, so something bolder. So now that looks much smoother, much better. Okay, so now we are done with the second section. We are going to be working on our third section before moving on to the footer. So here we'll just create another comment for this third section, and we will call it best sellers. Okay, so here we're just going to be creating a new class, and it will be a container. So the reason why I'm making it a class instead of an ID, since this is a container, we usually use an ID, is because just in case you might want to use this in other sections of this page. So in other sections of this website, you might want to use the same container, because this section we're going to call it best sellers. There could be top collection, there could be trending products, so you could create different sections with the same container class, so the same kind of layout, the same kind of styling, only that you could change the type of product. So that's why we're making it a class rather than an ID. So here we'll just call it simple, we'll call it product section container. Now we're going to be creating the heading, the first heading of our container, and we will call it best sellers. Okay, and now we're just going to be adding a little bit of description, but it's going to be small, so I'm just going to use a span. You can use the p tag, the paragraph, and we will call this class product section description. So we'll add the text later. Now we'll focus on creating the UL, so the unordered list, and we will create a class for it. So this will be our wrapper, in fact, and we will call this product section items wrapper. And now so we're going to be adding a list of items, so LIs, and each item is going to have its own class, and each each item will have its image, its text, and its button, to add to cart. Alright, so now as you can see, we have already created the section for the image and the section for the text. So the image will be on top, the text will be on the bottom. Here we will include the title, so we can start by the first one, and we'll just call it turquoise, light blue. And we want to make sure that there's always 3 words per line. So the second line, which will have the 3 remaining words, should be in the next line. Alright, so now over here we have called another container, a small container, we call it product purchase, and here we include the line which will have the price and which will have the button. So this will be to the left and this will be to the right. We can set this to $300, whereas the name of the button should be add to cart. Now the image we have our images set here, which is in collection, so we have to include our source, which is in images collection, and we can start with the watch. And an alternative, in case the browser is not working, is still yet to load, we can tell the user that this is actually going to be a turquoise watch, but not just any watch, it will be a smartwatch. Okay, so now I believe we have our list item ready, so we're going to be doing this. So we're going to be doing the same thing. We're going to copy this 2 more times below, but we're going to change the type of image as well as the name of the image, and we'll just change the price to maybe 400 and 500. Alright, so now when we check our items down below, we can see that we have our images ready. Now all we need to do is style it. However, we have not added our lorem ipsum description yet, so we'll add that right now. Alright, so now we are done with our items, with our HTML side of the best sellers. So we'll be working on our CSS file. Alright, so as always, we are going to be adding a comment in order to separate the section. So this is now a new section, and we will call it best sellers product section. Alright, so first we will work on our container. We have called it product section container, and this time our container is a class, so we'll use a dot in order to select the class, and we'll just add a little bit of spacing on top and on the bottom within the container. And we'll also be using the flex direction, the flex layout, in order to create a flex direction of a column, and to center everything and to position everything to the center horizontally as well as vertically. Alright, so now let's add some spacing. So now as you can see, we added only a margin, so spacing top between, so that there's space between the title as well as the other section above. And we also included some padding space. We also included the flex layout so that we could first of all position everything to the center vertically and horizontally, but mostly horizontally. And we used flex direction column, and because we used flex direction column, using justify content does not do anything, but justify content and setting it to center will help if the flex direction was in a row. But once again, since it is a column, place items will do the trick for us. So now let's work on our first heading. So since our first heading is inside the product section container, we'll just select the class as well as the element that we want to style, which is our first heading, and we'll just change the color, the font weight, and the font size. Alright, so now this time, usually we'd use, for dark gray we'd use 64, 64, 64, but this actually, I think we should still change it to 64, 64, 64. Yeah, I think that will match. We also used a font weight of 500, and we made sure that it also looked big, but not too large. So now we're going to be working on our description. So once again, we need to take the class. So this class is called product section description. So since it's a class, we'll use a dot to select it, and we'll also change the color. So the color of the text will be slightly lighter than that, and we'll also change the width, because we don't want it to be we don't want the text to be in one line only. So we'll change the width of the text to be slightly smaller, so that there'll be multiple lines. We'll not use padding, but we'll use width. And we'll also create spacing between the title and the span text, the description. Alright, so now we're done with the description. Now once again, since even though we changed the width to something smaller than 100%, usually the text would, or the element would lean towards the left side. It is automatically to the right, to the center, since the container or its container, the container of the description has already set it to the center. So now let's scroll down and create the styling of the wrapper. So we'd have to take the class of product section items wrapper. Okay, so we called the element, the type of element that we want, which was a UL, but specifically a UL or an unordered list that has the class product section items wrapper. So in here, basically what we want to do is to remove the bullet points, and we'll just include the flex layout. Since this is the wrapper of each of these products, we will set the wrapper to be in one line or in one row, and we'll make sure that each product has space around. Alright, so as you can see here, we removed the bullet points by using list style none. So now there are no more bullet points, and now everything is in one line thanks to the flex layout. We also use justify content space around, so there is slight space around each of the items. But as you can see, when you are able to scroll right, which is not good, so these items have overflown the document, so they're overflowing. So we'll have to change, but that's only because of the image size, so we'll change the image size very soon. But the width is also set to 70%. But we do not need to use margin auto, since the container, the direct parent of the wrapper, is products section container, and since we already positioned it to the center, we do not need to use margin auto since it is already centered. Now down here we'll be working on our product item, and what we want to do right now is to set a maximum width. Well, we will not set the maximum height over here, but we will set a maximum height for the image itself. But for the maximum width of each product item, we want it to be 280 pixels. We also want the corner to be a little more round, so we will use border radius, and we will set it to 7 pixels, just like our shop now button. And we also want some margin between, so we want some spacing outside of each product item so that they're not close together but they're spaced, and anything that overflows should be hidden. So now you will see now that the image will be hiding. So now you can't scroll to the right anymore because we use the overflow property, so it will hide any overflow, especially since the maximum width has been set. Now another thing is we want to add a box shadow. So we want to create a 3D effect for each box or each item, so not the image but the whole item box. And we will set it to, we don't want any X value, so let's keep that to 0. But for the Y value, we want the box shadow to show a little bit downward, so we'll make the Y value to 30 pixels. So the shadow will be leaning more towards the bottom. We'll also increase the blurry radius, and so this basically means it will make this basically makes the shadow more blurry or more smooth, really. So for example, if I put a lower value like 20 pixels, you wouldn't see much. It looks more sharp. We don't want that. We want it to be smooth, so I'll set it to 50 pixels. Now another problem is it looks too black, so we want to lighten it up, so we use the RGBA. We want our shadow to be black, but we just want it to be much lighter. So that looks good, but I feel like it should be much lighter than that. So the shadow should be subtle but not too subtle. So I think that looks good. Alright, so now we'll be working on our product image class. So over here we'll just create a new line and call out the product image class, and what we want to do is we want to set the height. So we want to set the height of the image here so that the remaining height of the product item will be the text as well as the price and the button. So we want to set the background color not to completely white, but something like dark, not dark gray, but light gray. Then we want to set our height to around 210 pixels, and we want to include the flex layout just so that we can position the item horizontally and vertically center. And we also want to add some spacing between the product item, So the image container as well as the image itself, we want some spacing in between. Alright, so now as you can see, okay, well, obviously we have not changed the properties, or yeah, the properties of the image just yet, so we will reduce the width and the height of the image very soon. But very soon you'll see that the background color, actually you can see right here, because each of these images are transparent, so you can see that, you know, this area is white but this area is a bit light blue. So my mistake, it's not actually light gray, but it is very, very light blue. And we also used a flex direction just so we could center the image vertically and horizontally center, but obviously you cannot see it right now, so we will add that very soon. So now we will work on the dimensions of the image. Whoops. So right here, since the img, the image, is inside of the product image, we will call the class name or its container and the image element itself, and we want the height to be 100%. It should not go over that. So now that looks way better, and also because of the 30 pixels of spacing that we added between the image and the container, the whole box. And we also want our width to be automatic. Well, it's already automatic, as you can see, so if you want to add that you can, but it is already automatic by default. Alright, and now we'll be working on our text. So in our index page, we want to collect the text, and since it is a class, we'll be using a dot to call it out. And all we want to do for this, it's going to be like a container, so it's literally a container for the text, the price, and the button. So all we want to do is hold it as its container. We want it to be centered, and we want some spacing because there's barely any spacing within the container. So that will look good in just a sec. So it does not look right, but it will look good very soon. We just need to increase the sizes of the titles and the price and the button as well. So now we'll be working on our product title. So over here we'll just use a dot to call the title out, and what we want to do is we want to set the color to something darkish, so not as light as the title, but we want it to be a little more darker, a darker gray. So we'll go with 50 50 50. And another thing that we want to do is change the font size and the font weight, because it is too small right now and it is too thin. So we'll set the font size to 18 pixels and we'll set the font weight to something bolder, such as 500. Okay, so that looks much better. And now we will work on the price, the container that holds the price and the button. So over here we just want to include some spacing on top, so on top of the product purchase container, between the price and the button as well as the title. Another thing we want to do is we want to set the width to 100%, because it seems like the width of the container is only from here to here, so it only rather automatic only based on the size of the price and the button, but we want it to cover the full width. And we also want to make sure that there is space between both of these items, and we want to make sure that that they're both vertically centered. So now let's work on that. Alright, so now as you can see, we have set the width to 100%, and we also made sure that there was space between the button and the price, so they're both spaced out to the corners. So now we'll be working on the price, because again the color of the text is not good, as well as the font size and the font weight. Okay, so now as you can see, the color of the text basically aligns with the button that we used, basically the theme color of our e-commerce website, as well as the button. And we changed the font weight to 500, so we increased the boldness, and we also increased the font size to be equivalent to the price of, the size of the price, not the price, the title. So now we're going to be working on the add to cart button. So we'll just call out the button and whoops, add to cart. So over here all we need to do is increase the padding, because since it is using the blue button class, which we have used in other areas of the page, we just need to increase the padding, increase the border radius to what we want it to be, and the font size. Alright, so now as you can see, we have increased the padding size. So we increased the size vertically by 7 pixels, but it is smaller, and we increased the horizontal size, so from left to right, by 21 pixels. We also made the corner much more rounder, but not too round, so it kind of matches the border radius that we added for the Shop Now button, and we increased the font size to 16 pixels. Alright, so now it looks pretty good. However, this item does not look good at all. So I think one thing that we need to change is the width of the wrapper. So we'd have to go back to the wrapper, and here we'll change the width to something a little bit wider. So now that looks good. And we also need to change the spelling of turquoise because we did not spell it right the first time. So over here we just need to spell it as turquoise. Alright, so now we will be working on the fourth section of our page, which is right above the footer, and we will be promoting a product. So we'll be choosing this iPad, this Yellow Sunshine iPad. Obviously you can choose the image that you're going to be using. So now let's scroll down. Okay, so we have to make it clear that this is the end. Actually, let's start from here. So this is the end of our collection. So let's create a comment here so that we won't get confused. Alright, and over here our div starts from here, so this will be the end of our product collection. Alright, so now we will create a new comment, and this will indicate the new section that we will call iPad promo. So promo standing for promo or promotion. So over here we'll just create a new div, and whoops, I mean, doing it in capital letter works, but it's advised to use small caps in every line of code that you're writing in HTML and CSS. So our class we will call promo container. So again, we're going to make this a class rather than an ID, since just so you could use it in other areas or other sections, other areas of the page. So for example, if you want to repeat the iPad promotion once or twice, one to promote the iPad, for example, and another to promote the headphone, then we will need to use a class, since class can be used for multiple items, but an ID can only be used for one item or one element or a container that will only be used once. Alright, so now we'll create another class, and we'll just call it promo box. So this promo box will basically act as our wrapper. So it's going to be the box that will have the color on the left side. It will have the color yellow, very light blue, and we'll have the yellow iPad, whereas the right side will have the text. So that's why in the promo box we're going to be creating two divs. So the first div we'll call the class promo image container. Actually, we'll just keep it as promo image, and our second div we will call promo content. Alright, so inside our promo content we will have our first heading. So we'll have two headings. So our first one will be a little smaller, and we'll just say something like new arrivals. Our second heading will have something like the name of the product, actually, which is Sunshine iPad. And now we can also add or include the description, so we'll include some lorem ipsum text. And last but not least, we can also add a button that will help us to when the button is clicked, it will redirect the user to full details of the product. Alright, so now instead of using the blue button as we always use, as we have used throughout the page, we're using a white button, since the background color of this side of the container will be the blue color that we see. Alright, so now when we reload our page and when we scroll down, we can obviously see nothing yet. We do not see any background, we do not see any much of the description. So actually we will copy and paste some lorem ipsum text. Alright, so now we have our lorem ipsum text. We want to include our image, and that is going to be the Sunshine yellow iPad. And for our alternative name, we will just go with the title name, which is Sunshine Yellow Bright. Actually, I don't think we included the proper alternative names for the iPad and the headphones, so we just used the same thing for the turquoise smartwatch, since we copied pasted. So we'll just copy this, not here, but the second one is Sunshine, and this one is Candy Floss. Okay, so that is much more descriptive and much more better. So now we can move on to our CSS file and design the container. Alright, so now before we forget later on, we will just include the same comments down below. So down below, I mean not below, but actually next to the end of the div. So we'll just call it end of iPad promo. So now let's head over to our CSS file. So over here, we're going to call out the container, which we have called promo container. And since it is a class, we're going to be using a dot in order to select it. So what we want to do is make sure that the width is 100%. We want some spacing on top, so between this section as well as the promo section, and we also want a margin bottom, so we want some spacing between this section, this promo container, and the footer that we'll be adding later on. And we will set it into a flex container just so we don't need to use, when we change or when we set the width of the promo box, which will have, you know, a smaller width, will not be 100%, we will not need to add margin auto. Alright, so now we have set the container to cover the full width of the screen or of the page, and we have included some spacing on top and on the bottom, and we've also included the flex layout just so we could center the container. I mean, we could center the items inside the container, and items meaning only the children, but the promo container only has one child, which is promo box, so it has a centered promo box. So now we are going to be working on promo box. So here we'll be adding the background color, the design, and how we want our content to be separated. So it'll be image on the left and text to the right. So now let's work on that. Alright, so now as you can see, it is coming into place much more. So we have changed the width to 68%. Obviously you can change it to the width that you prefer. I just found this value to be effective. Then we also determined the height of the promo box, which is going to be around 450 pixels, and we used a flex layout so we could make sure that the image as well as the text content would be placed to the center, as well as and to be in one line or one row. Now we have not added the background color yet. Since there will be the promo box will not have one universal color. The color will be determined whether on if it's the image container or whether it's the text container. So this will have a different color to this. So this side will be a lighter blue and this side will be a darker blue. So we will not set promo box because promo box covers the whole thing. So we do not want it to have one color. So we do not set the background color. But very soon you will see that there'll be a border radius, and also because we have added a rounded corner, we needed overflow hidden so that if there was a pointy corner, we'd want to hide it, and we'd want to make sure that only the rounded corner would be seen from promo box. Alright, so now we'll be working on our image container. So we have called it promo image. And inside, this is where we're going to determine the color. The background color will be a light blue, so I found a great combination. We're also going to be using a flex direction just so we could center the image vertically and horizontally center. And we want to make sure that there's also padding space around or inside the container. Alright, so I found this light blue to be effective, or to be, you know, pleasing, aesthetically pleasing. So now we'll be adding our flex layout and justify content in order to center the image horizontally, and we're also going to use place items to center the image vertically. Okay, and well, last but not least, we'll be adding a little bit of spacing, and we'll set it to 40 pixels. Alright, and now the image itself, now we're going to be working on the image. So we'll just call out the container. So the container of the image is promo image, and we'll call the element itself, which is img. And what we want to do is we want to set the width to 90%. So now that looks much better. Alright, so one more thing that we want to do is we want to set the width of the image container to 100% so it can fill its full capacity. So now that looks much better. So now we'll be working on the text side of the promo box. So here we have called it promo content. You can also call it promo text. Since it is a class, once again we'll be using a dot to call it out, and right now we want to include some spacing within the element. So we will set it to 60 pixels, which is good enough. Now we also want to include a flex layout so that we can, first of all, we want to change the flex direction to be in a column, because since a flex layout has a flex direction of row by default, or causes elements within a container to be in a row by default, we want to change the flex direction to be in a column. Alright, and now because a height has been defined, which is 450 pixels, we can use justify content in order to center it vertically. So now it looks good. Alright, so now we also want the content or the text area or the text container to fill its full capacity. So we will set the width to 100% as well. Alright, so now we'll be changing the background color, and we want it to match the same background color that we used for the buttons. For the buttons and basically the logo, the color of the logo. So it's kind of like the colored theme, or the themed color. So we'll go with 65, 105, 225. Yeah. Now we'll be working on our first heading, second heading, and our P tag, as well as our button. So first we'll start with our first heading, and it's gonna be pretty simple. So for our first heading, we want the color to be white. We also want the font size to be slightly big but not too big, and it's too bold, so we will reduce the font the font weight to 500. And once again, we have not used this for a while, so WebKit font smoothing once again will soften the lining of each letter. So once we set it to anti-alias, that is, so it gives a more softer look. And now we'll be working on our second heading. So once again, we want the color to be white, we want the font color to be white, we want the font size to be bigger than the first heading. So we'll set it to 40 pixels, and we want it to be slightly bolder. Now once again, we want it to look more smooth, so we'll be using the WebKit font smoothing property, and we will set, and it feels like there's very little margin spacing between the title and the description or text. So we will use the margin button property, and we will set a spacing of 10 pixels. Alright, so now we'll be working on our P tag. Oops. So in here, once again, we want the color of the font to be white, or the color of the text to be white, and we want to reduce the font weight slightly to perhaps 400, and we want a smaller font size compared to the first heading and the second heading that we used. So we'll set it to something like 18 pixels, and we also want some spacing between the text and the button, so we will use margin bottom to create that spacing, and we will set it to 30 pixels. Now once again, I still feel like it is too bold, so we will smoothen the font by using like a WebKit font smoothing. So now that it is anti-aliased, it looks much smoother and much better. So now the last thing that we're going to be working on is our button. So we have named our class white button, and we might want to use the white button in the other sections. So we'll be calling out the name of the container that it is in, which is promo content. Whoops. And we will call out the element that we want, which is the white button. Alright, so over here we want to change the padding space. But we do need to we do want to change the properties of the element button specifically, so we'll be calling out button to be more specific. And so vertically we want the spacing to be of just 14 pixels, whereas horizontally we want it to be 30 pixels wide. For the background color, I think we'll just leave it to white, since this is a white background, a white button. And we will set the color of the text to be the same color that we used that we used for the background color of the promo content. Another thing is we just want to slightly reduce the size of the button, the size of the text that is inside the button, to 17 pixels, and though we want it to be much more wider, and we'll be using WebKit font smoothing in order to make the text much more smoother. Now you can see that there is a border by default, so we want to remove that, so we'll set border to 0. And we also want it to be more round. I feel like it looks too square-like and it doesn't look very modern, so we'll be setting the border radius to 30 pixels. So we want it to be much more round, just like our first button over here in our top section. Now, last thing is we want to include a hovering effect, so we'll be using transition. So basically, transition will be used to determine how long it takes for the change that you want when the mouse is hovered. So what we want is the background color change. So we want it to take 0.4 seconds for the background color of the button to change from white to dark blue, and we want the color of the text to be white as well. So we want two changes, the color of the text and the color of the button itself. So we are going to use this right here, so we're going to hover around it. So we'll use the hover keyword, and what we want is when it is hovered, we want the color of the text to be white, whereas the background color should be something dark blue. So I found a great combination. Okay, so now when we test it out and when we hover our mouse around it, it looks pretty smooth, pretty clean. So now we'll be working on our footer. Alright, so now our product production looks pretty good. However, we do want to change the size of the button, as I feel like it should be automatic rather than, because right now it fills the whole entire space of the container, which is set, and the container is promo content right here, and it is set to 100%, but we do not want that. So we either change the width to automatic and we use inline block, or we could just create another div simply so that it will not have to take in the characteristics or the properties of promo content. Oops. Okay, there we go. Okay, I think it looks great. However, I feel like now the button is too narrow, so over here we'll just change this to 40 pixels. So now that I believe that looks slightly better. Alright, so I think the product promotion section looks great. However, we'll change the font size and reduce it by 1 pixel. So now that should look better. Also, I feel like it would be better if we removed this keyword, since it makes the description look longer. Or otherwise, we could remove 2 words from the previous line. So now that looks much more cleaner. So now we'll be working on our footer. Alright, so I believe that everything looks good now, so we're going to be creating the footer part, or the footer section. So right after the body tag, we're going to be creating the footer. The footer will be separated by 2 sections. So the first stop will actually have like contact information. We'll have the logo itself on the top, and then contact information right below the image or the logo of the website or the e-commerce website. And then on the bottom part, we're just going to include links like home, product, services, about, and we'll include the copyright text. So now let's start by creating an ID, a div and an ID for the footer top. Alright, so now we're going to first include the image, and the image is simply the logo. And the alternative, if in case the browser has not loaded the image yet, then we can go with typing in the text eLife logo, and the width can be any size. For this image, I found a good combination value of 220 width in pixels and 110 pixels in height. Alright, so now after this, we're going to create the wrapper. So the wrapper will have all the 3 contact information, so everything will be justified according to, we'll be justifying the content by having space between. So we're going to call it simply footer wrapper. Actually, we'll call it footer socials wrapper. Alright, so inside we're going to be having 3 divs, and they're all going to be classes, since they're going to have the same property. So in each class we're going to have an SVG, and then a span text. So the span text will have, you know, kind of like the title or the name of that social, or the number. So or the, you know, the contact information, I mean the contact number. So we're going to call the class for each of these three social icons footer social. Alright, so inside we'll be including a div, so we'll add that later on, but now let's include a span text. We'll start with the contact number. Alright, so as you can see, we added you know, just a random number 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 until 9. Now the next thing, we want to include perhaps a Telegram social platform, so we will call it Telegram. And last but not least, we're going to include the Twitter platform. Alright, so before we add our SVGs, we're going to create the second section of our footer, and we'll call it footer bottom. Okay, so inside we're going to create an unordered list, just like we did for the navigation bar. We're going to be including these links, home until about. So we'll be adding a UL or unordered list, and we'll be creating an list item, and then we'll be including the copyright text. Okay, so as you can see, we included the unordered list and all of the list items, and now we're going to include the copyright text. So it's just going to be something random, such as copyright. Okay, we'll need to include this C tag. We'll go with 2024 live, all rights reserved. Okay, so now we're going to get the symbol of the copyright C. We just want to copy and paste it. Okay, right here. And we will paste it in here. Okay, so now we should be able to see everything. Now we have to include the CSS designing, but first let's include the SVGs before we forget. So for the phone number, we'll just include you know, obviously a telephone, Telegram, the Telegram icon, and oops, this is not supposed to be platform, this is supposed to be Twitter, and the Twitter icon. So we'll get them from Bootstrap. Okay, so now we have included our icons from Bootstrap, so now we'll be working on the CSS side of our footer. Alright, so first obviously we're going to create a comment so we can make our CSS file easier to navigate. And here we'll just call out the footer element, and all we want to do is create include a background color that is similar to this very light color. And we also want to make sure that everything that is going to be inside the footer should be centered. And we also obviously want to create some spacing inside, so we'll use padding. And we also want to make sure that all text that is going to be in the side of the footer should have a dark gray font color. Okay, so now you can see that everything is centered just like we want. So the next thing that we want to work on is the footer top. So here we'll just copy this, and we're going to use a hashtag to select it, and we're going to include some spacing inside. So footer top is basically the logo as well as these platform links here, and this is the footer bottom. So we want to create some spacing in between these two sections, and because all of these texts will be in one line, we do not want it to take up the full width of the footer, but we want it to take only 60% maximum. And in order to make sure that it stays to the center, we'd have to use margin auto. So let's set it to 60% of the footer, and now you can see it has gone to the left. So in order to center it back horizontally, we'd have to use margin auto. Alright, so now we're going to be working on the wrapper itself to make sure that it all becomes in one line. So we'll have to use the flex layout, and the image is already sorted, so we'll just work on the wrapper. Since it is an ID, we'll select it with a hashtag, and right now we will include a spacing of 40 pixels. That is quite a lot, but we wanted to make sure that it looks spaced out and not crammed. Another thing which we need to include in order to make all of the links or platforms in one line is we need to include the flex layout. And since it is already in one line by default, we don't have to define the flex direction, but we want to make sure that there is space between each element. Alright, so one more thing is we want to include some margin top. This is optional, of course, but if you feel like there needs to be some more spacing in between from the logo to the text, then go ahead, because we're going to increase the size of each SVG and each link very soon, so the spacing on top will be very much needed. Okay, so now we're going to work on the classes called footer social. So we'll use a dot in order to select that class, and we'll set it in a flex layout once again, and we want to make sure that everything is placed vertically center, and this is going to be needed. Yeah, so now you can see it looks better. And now we want to create a space between the logo and the text itself, so we're going to call out the span text, since each text is held up by a span by the span element. So since the span element is inside the footer social container, we'll just use that to call the span element. And now we just want spacing to the left hand side of the text, so that there is space in between, and we'll set it to 20 pixels. Okay, so now we're going to set the font size to 16 pixels. It is already 16 pixels by default, but we just want to, make it clear what font size value it has. Alright, so now we're going to work on the footer bottom. So we'll start here, and we're going to select this with a hashtag since it is an ID, and what we want to do is include a flex layout, and as you can see, the footer bottom is separated into sections. So the first section is all of the links from home, product, services, about, and the second section is the copyright text. So we want this part to be to the left and this copyright to the right. So we're going to include a flex layout, and we're going to use justify content, and the value will be space between. We're also going to define the width, but that is your choice. Either you decide to choose padding right and define padding left and padding right, or you can just change the width simply, which I like to do. Okay, so first let's include the flex layout. Now you can either choose to put padding left and padding right in order to create spacing, because obviously there's no space from the left and right side. So we're going to either you choose padding left and padding right in order to create space and make it more towards the center, or you could define the width that you want it to have, which I prefer doing, and we'll set it to 90% of the footer. Now obviously it is leaning towards the left side, so we're gonna have to use margin auto. So now that should center that. And another thing is we want to make sure, first of all, we want to include a border. So a little light gray, very light gray border on top of the footer bottom container. So we're going to be using the border property, and specifically border top. So we want the border to be on top of the container. So set it to 1 pixel. We want to make sure that it is solid, and we want to set it to a color that is very light gray. So I found 169, 169, 169 to be a good combination. Okay, so now in order to create spacing between the elements inside and the line itself, or the border itself, we're gonna have to use padding top, and we'll set it to 30 pixels. So that should create spacing inside. And another thing is we just want to make sure that there is enough spacing between the top section of the banner, the top section of the footer and the bottom section of the footer. So we'll set it to 20 pixels. So now we will work on the unordered list, since that does not look nice, and we want everything to be, we want the border and all the elements to be on the bottom. So we'll be working on the unordered list, and since the unordered list container, or the parent div, is footer bottom, we'll just use footer bottom in order to call the element. And as always, we always have to set list style to none in order to remove the bullet points, and we'll set it to a flex layout, or a flexible layout. Alright, so we're almost done. So now we're going to be calling out, we're going to be editing the list items. So what we're going to do is call out the A tag, so the anchor tag, or the list, or the link tag, you would say. We want to create a spacing, so we'll include margin of 20 pixels. And another thing is we want to remove the text decoration, we want to remove the underline, so we'll set text decoration to none, and we'll change the color from blue to dark gray. Alright, so that looks good. Now another thing that we did not do is we did not change the size of the icons. So we will set it to a width and a height of 40 pixels. So here we'll just change everything to 40. Alright, so now what we want to do is include a hovering effect. So when the mouse hovers around the link text, we want it to change to this color of blue, or this shade of blue. So here we're just going to copy the link that we used, but now this time we're going to add the keyword hover. And all we want to do is change the color to the themed color of the e-commerce website, which is right here. We'd also have to include the transition property in order to create a smooth effect, so a smooth change in color. So, and we want to slow the color change to 0.3 seconds, ease and out. So when we hover around the mouse, it creates a lovely slow yet smooth hovering effect. Alright, so now that we're done with the footer, we can scroll back up because now we're going to be working on the navigation bar. So what we want to do is create a JavaScript effect. So we're going to be using JavaScript for this. So when we scroll down, we want the navigation bar to change to white, as it does not look good when we scroll down and we cannot see the navigation, the elements in the navigation bar properly, or the links properly. So we'd want to create a white background for whenever the document is being scrolled down, and then when the user goes back up, the navigation bar color should change back to transparent. So in order to include our JavaScript code, we'd have to, inside the head tag, create a script tag. Okay, so in here what we want to do is call the document itself, and we want to add an event listener. So we want to listen to any events or any changes or anything that is being made to the document. So what we want to do is we want to listen for when the document content is loaded. So we want to use DOM content loaded, and DOM basically stands for document object model, and it's basically literally a model that contains the structure of the elements, how the elements are layered, how the elements are ordered, and the document itself. So we want to load the content. So the content is basically all the elements, so all the links, the navigation bar, all of the containers, the images, everything that is inside the document. So we want to make sure that everything in the document is loaded for our function to be processed. So we're going to use an arrow function. You can either choose an arrow function, or you can call out the keyword function, or you can use an arrow function, but I prefer using an arrow function since I feel like it is slightly easier and more convenient to type. Alright, so now we want to create another event listener. So we want the document to listen for something else, for another change happening inside the document. So what we want to do is we want it to listen for any scroll. So any scroll that is being made, we want the document to listen and to pay attention. And once again, we'll use an arrow function. And inside, what we want to do is collect the navigation bar element, and we're going to use query selector for this. And we want to see and check whether the navigation bar, whether the document is being scrolled downwards. So not left to right, downwards. So we use scroll Y. We'll be using an if statement. So if the document is being scrolled down, then change the background, and change the box shadow, or include a box shadow. But if it is on top, or if a user is down and scrolls back to the top, then make the navigation back to transparent and remove the box shadow. So first, let's select the nav bar. So it can be any name that you want. So in order to create a variable, you can use the keyword let, or you can use the keyword var, but I feel like let is much better. So we want to declare and assign the nav bar. This can be any name that you would like to choose. I chose nav bar, and what we want to do is select the nav element. So we're going to use the keyword query selector, and we want to select the nav element. So if we were selecting an ID, for example the navbar ID, then we would have to use a hashtag just like CSS and select the navbar. But since we're just collecting the element, we don't need any signs or anything. And it is important to include a semicolon so that JavaScript knows that this is the end of the first of whatever line you're currently on. Okay, so now we're going to create another line where we include the if statement. So in order to create an if statement, we'd have to use the if keyword, and we'd have to include our statement inside brackets. So what we want to do is we want to check the window, and we want to see if the window scroll y value is currently 0 or not. So we'd have to use the keyword scroll y, because y value is from up to down, so we want to listen to the y value. X value would be from left to right, but this is scrolling downwards, so we want to collect the y value, and we want to see first if it is greater than 0. Because if it is greater than 0, then that means the user has scrolled down or has started to scroll down. But if it is at 0, then that means the navigation bar is on the very top, and that's where we want the navigation bar to be transparent. But if it is greater than 0, then we want to change the background color to white, and we want to include a box shadow. So first we would call the navigation bar element that we created, and we want to change the styling of the navigation bar, so we use the keyword style. And another thing is we want to select the background, so we can and we want to change the background, so you can either choose background or background color, just like CSS, you know, whatever you prefer. And we want to change the background color to white. So if we scroll down, we can see that the color is changing to white, but even when we scroll back up, we want the background color to change back to transparent. But first, let's include a box shadow because it looks 2D. So we will call out the element once again. We want to change the styling, and we want to include a box shadow. I feel like this property was not here before. You'd have to use like square brackets in order to select the property of box shadow, and make it look like it was being called in CSS. But now I feel like it is modern. They started to add a proper box shadow property in JavaScript. So let's change this value to 0 pixels x y's, you know, from the x value, but we want a 5 pixels y value. So we want the box shadow to go more downwards, and we want the blurriness to be of 20 pixels. Now that looks too dark. Even though it looks kind of blurry and smooth, it looks too dark and it looks too sharp. So we want to create a smooth contrast, because from white to black it does not look good. So we want to change the color and the transparency or opacity. So we want to choose a kind of like a light gray color. So we'll go with 190. I feel like that fit well. So it's kind of light gray. So it looks good. It gives a great glowing effect, but we want it to be a little bit more transparent. But this is obviously optional. So we'll set the alpha, or the transparency, or the opacity value to 0.15, which I thought looked good. So now I personally think that it looks better, and it kind of looks subtle, which is what we wanted. Alright, so now we're going to create an else statement. So if the scroll y value is not greater than 0, but it is 0 itself, then we want the background color to be transparent. So just copy this and paste this here. So we want it to be transparent. Oh, we have to use a string, so we'd have to use the apostrophe, or speech marks also works. And we would also want to remove the box shadow, so we'll set the box shadow to none. Alright, so when we reload our website and when we scroll down, we can see that our navigation bar has changed to white, and when we scroll back up, it changes back to transparent and the box shadow is removed. But we want to create a smooth transition, so we'd have to go back to the nav element right here, and in order to create a smooth change of the color of the navigation color from transparent to white, we will include the transition property, and we'll set it to, I think, 0.4 seconds. Kind of fits, and we want it to be, when it changes from transparent to white and white to transparent. So when we reload our page and when we scroll down, okay, so now you can see a lovely smooth transition, but I'll put it to 0.3 because we don't want to see the box shadow change. Yeah, so that looks way smoother, and that looks way better, so it does not look abrupt anymore. Alright, so now our website looks good. However, we have not added the link change in color, so we'd have to go back to our link. So in here, we'll just copy this right here, since that is where our link is, and we want to change the text color of the link from dark gray to the blue colored theme of the e-commerce website. So now it changes up, but we'll also have to include a transition effect. So now the link color should change even when it has a white background. So it looks pretty good. Alright, so now we are at the end of this video. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I know this video is pretty long. It is almost 2 hours, but I really hope that you learned many new things. And please do comment down below if you prefer longer videos like this, or if you prefer short videos like I've done in the past. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you for reaching to the end of this video. Please do like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell in order to get notified for the future videos to come. And see you next time.